It's funny, players get really caught up about the size of their opponents, but there are a few things that you can do if you do come up against a really tall opponent, for example. Hi guys, Sandy here. Now we've been asked a lot what we should be doing against really tall players, and vice versa, what we should be doing with shorter players, you know, if we're trying to get them out of those back corners, for example. If you're someone that plays a lot of games, you will play a huge variety of size opponents. So that's what we're going to discuss today, is what you should be doing against tall and short players, and also if you are a tall or short player, what you can do to maximize your own game. Before we go into the advantages and disadvantages, you should be aware that in paddle there is quite a big variety. I mean, the tallest player at the moment at the top is about 190, which is Cuello, which is 6'2", and the smallest player is Chingoto, who is about 5'6", 170. And you know, there is obviously variation in their game, but we don't have, you know, these really tall Karloviches or Isners that you would find in tennis, because really kind of above that height it can be quite difficult to reach the low balls, and you don't get a lot of players, you know, Chingoto size, just because it makes you less effective at net. And obviously, I mean, he is super effective at his game. So you can see that we have amazing players, you know, at the tall end, but also at the short end. So if we start with what you should be doing against taller players, now this is a little bit of a generalization, because sometimes you will have tall players with extremely fast reactions. And so, you know, not all of these are necessarily the case, but quite often, if you were to play a fast ball to the body, it is more difficult for a taller player to react and block that. Now, obviously, at the World Padel Tour level, the tall players are all super fast, but generally speaking, you know, a fast ball to the body is much more difficult because of the wingspan. Yeah, if you just use, and we think of Cuello as an example, his wingspan across the net is huge. So for you to play into space is a lot more difficult, but to play towards the body is usually more difficult for the tall player to react and play that ball. Likewise, playing soft down to the feet, Chiquitas, for example, you know, that is an action that they've just got further to go. So that's two things that you can do when they're at net. When it comes to lobbing tall players, now this really depends on how good they are under the ball hitting smashes. If they're not so confident, then you can hit a really high lob and they've got to come under it and get into position. But if they're quite good at smashing, which a lot of tall players are, then you might opt for the faster lob, yeah, with a lower trajectory. That means, you know, they have to kind of play a lower ball off that back glass once it goes over their head. And, you know, as a bonus tip, you want to do that as a double combination, yeah? So short and low to the feet, and then a fast lob over their head, and you want to get them scrambling to the back of the court if you can. So for taller players at the back of the court, again, trying to keep the ball low. If you hit your volleys low with a little bit of slice, forcing them to get low, again, they've got further to go. Yeah, you see, again, a lot of good players at World Padel Tour level that have no problem doing this, but for a lot of taller players, it can be quite difficult to maneuver themselves around if you're hitting low, fast, you know, volleys with a little bit of slice, making them, you know, use the glass, turn in the double glass, things like that. Yeah, that is probably the best way to play. If you go into the spaces, they're quite often good at lunging and getting that ball back, but, you know, around their feet area and fast, it is often more difficult. When you're playing against shorter players, obviously the lob is a good shot because, you know, it's easier to clear their heads. But just be aware that if you do hit quite a high lob, you know, something that a taller player might not be able to hit an aggressive Bajada on at the back, a shorter player might be able to, yeah, because they'll be able to move back and play that ball at head height. And if the difference of head height, you know, is a foot or two, then that could be, you know, a very powerful shot that they could hit, you know, which you might not be expecting. Yeah, so again, you know, the faster lob can be a good way to counteract that if someone, you know, is good at attacking off that back glass. And obviously, as they have less wingspan at net, you would probably want to play into the gaps, yeah? This is where, you know, Chiquita angles or fast down the middle can be good because, you know, they've got less reach and therefore less time to go and get that ball. If you're playing against shorter players from the back of the court, then you want to try and make them kind of cover as much ground as quickly as possible, yeah? So This is when you might use more often a kind of flatter, faster volley that bounces fast off the glass that they would then have to charge forward afterwards, or maybe soft down the middle, making them cover a lot of ground, and that will obviously then open up, you know, that fast flat volley, for example, on the next shot. Yeah, but you're really trying to get them to cover as much ground as possible, because if you go fast to them towards their body and you hit low, usually they'll be quite good at kind of moving and getting out of the way of that and defending. Yeah, again, this is a generalization. You might play against a short player who's not very good at defending, in which case, you know, there's less kind of tactical pressure on that. Yeah, so but just as a general guideline, you know, trying to make them move you know, further distances at speed is difficult, obviously, for a shorter player. So when it comes to what you can do if, for example, you are a taller player, one of those is to try and dominate the net position, and that does not necessarily mean you have to hit winners. Yeah, if you are at net, it means usually that your opponents are at the back, so the longer you keep the net, the more advantage you are going to have in the point. Yeah, so don't feel like you immediately have to hit a winner, but if you can dominate this net position, generally speaking, that is a better place for taller players to be. If you're a shorter player, you may want to think about playing to your strengths. Yeah, that might be if you're a bit faster or you have good reactions. So you might want to use, you know, for example, the Chiquita shot and then come in and have these reaction volleys. That's what Chingoto is so good at. And you might want to try and avoid those areas where you've got to cover a lot of ground. This is obviously a generalization, and there are going to be loads and loads of exceptions to this. But if you are a tall player or a short player, or you play against them regularly, let me know down in the comments if you think that this is a good representation of how they play.